shit. That's what I'm talking about.
Wait! Okay, now, from the beginning.
Welcome to BS, Beyond Stereotypes, a podcast about lawyers using their authentic voices to change the world.
It's diversity, but that's like, you want me to assimilate and become like you. I don't want to do that. The key is when you can get inclusion and then equity, and that requires the organization, institution to change.
Welcome to BS, Beyond Stereotypes. I'm your host, Merle Vaughn. Here to BS with me today is Jeff Harleston, whose story I find fascinating and have no doubt will inspire all of you to embrace your authenticity. Hi, Jeff. Thanks for joining us.
Hi, Merle. Happy to be here. Thank you so much.
Great. So wanted to just let everybody know a little bit about you. You can always correct me if I'm wrong. You can give us more details, but I know that you graduated from Williams College undergrad. You then came to the West Coast to Berkeley Law School, which is where I met you many moons ago. You've worked for a couple of very high-profile private law firms out of law school, and then became a federal prosecutor, ultimately before becoming going to Universal Music and ultimately becoming the general counsel. Is that pretty accurate?
That's fairly, it's fairly accurate, a little condensed, but fairly accurate.
Well, why don't you give us a little bit more flavor?
Okay. I have I've been at Universal for 27 years, almost to the day, and it was a kind of one of those things that was one of life's unexpected surprises. As you mentioned, I'd been working for 2 years in perhaps the greatest job I ever have had and probably will ever have. As a prosecutor in the Office of Independent Counsel, which is what we used to call them. Now we call them special prosecutors. But this was for Iran-Contra, which was a big scandal coming out of the Reagan administration. That tour of duty ended rather abruptly when we were effectively shut down by then President Bush, and so I had to find a job.
Okay.
And a good friend of mine from law school, who had been following all the activity, reached out to me and said, "I saw what happened. I can't believe that you guys got shut down. I don't know what you're thinking of doing next, but I'm working at this record company in Los Angeles, and you'd be great at this. We're about to hire some more people. I think you'd be great." And I'm like, come on, at this point, I was a litigator. In my firm career, obviously as a prosecutor, I'm thinking, maybe if I stick with this, I might be able to be a judge one day.
Right.
Maybe I go to a U.S. attorney's office. Maybe I go back to the firm. But the thought of getting into the music business and moving to Los Angeles were both kind of like, that's odd. But being at a point in my life where I had no real encumbrances, so to speak. I was not married, didn't have any kids, so I thought, you know what, I'll send my resume. They liked it. They flew me out. They hired me, and very quickly I was moving to LA, which I thought would be probably a year or two, but. Surprisingly, I've been there 27 years, all with the same company. And I started with Universal, which at the time was the music group was known as MCA Records. And during the course of my time there, I started as it was probably the lowest form of life in a record company, which is the most junior lawyer. And over time, worked my way up to be the head lawyer for MCA Records, and then the head lawyer ultimately for our entire company. which is comprised of several record labels, a music publishing company, a merchandising company, and some other things.
Wow, I'm even more impressed now, Jeff. So, you know, is that do you feel like, because I think this is really could be really interesting for people who just don't know how. I know you got a call from a friend, and that's being, that's fortuitous, but you also decided to take the leap. You took the risk. You sent your resume in. Is that something that defines who you are? Have you always been that person? Are you still that person? Is this something that you advise, especially young people, young lawyers, to do?
I'll tell you, it's interesting. I got some advice early on in my career, and it was advice. It was like kind of career path advice, and it was when you're looking to make a move, whether within an organization or maybe leaving to go to a different company or firm or something like that. He said one thing to always think about is how many doors will this move open versus how many doors will this move potentially close. So
Hmm.
as you're evaluating where what your next move is, it's like, well, if I go down this road, if I take this job, if I'm at a law firm and I decide to go in house, is that closing doors for me or is that opening doors? Well, one might think it's opening some doors because I ultimately want to transition into being a business person. So maybe in house makes sense, or it may close some doors because, well, if I go in house, I'm going to move off of a path in terms of a practice area or something that I think might be somewhere I could excel and become the preeminent you know litigator for First Amendment or something like that. So you kind of do that. You kind of flip these things around in your head. And to this point, like when I got the offer to join the independent counsel's office, I said, this is a move that definitely opens doors for me in the future, and I don't see it closing many. But when I got the offer to go work at MCA Records, I really I had to stew on it a bit because I did feel for the first time I was closing doors. I was going down perhaps a path that was taking me away from being a litigator because now I was going in house to effectively you know, spend a lot of time in a transactional environment, which was different for me. Hadn't done that before. And kind of turning my back on litigation and turning my back on a path that I really knew what it was. I didn't really know where this path would take me. Um, but I thought no. The short answer is no. It was not who I was at the time, but I took the risk anyway. And I think things have worked out okay.
Cool. So, I guess, well, I know we're here to talk about stereotypes and getting beyond them. And um, one stereotype that comes out of what you just said was that you were a litigator and that you had never done corporate transactions before. And did you feel did you feel that people were making stereotypes about you, either professionally, personally, in any way, when you made this switch? And do you think that they were right or wrong? And were there any stereotypes you have felt like you've had to overcome?
Well, I'll deal with your last question last because I view that a little
Okay.
bit separate. I didn't see. No, it was actually very interesting at the time. My boss at the time who hired me had a distinct philosophy that he actually hired almost exclusively people who had litigation backgrounds, and the reason was his philosophy was twofold. One is if you're a litigator, you're probably going to be better attuned to where a contract can go wrong and where
Got
it
it.
might fall apart and where the problems are. And secondly, he felt that in a basic record contract is not the most sophisticated transaction you'll ever do, right? It's not like a big,
M&A.
M&A deal or a big, um, real estate deal or something of that nature. There are not that many moving parts to a record deal. So, that's something he felt. If I find somebody who's genuinely smart enough and motivated enough with a litigation background, that's probably a pretty good bet. So I didn't feel stereotyped. I mean, maybe transactional lawyers from a firm might
Right.
feel stereotyped,
Right.
but I did not feel stereotyped in that way at all. No. Have I dealt with stereotypes in my career?
Yes.
Yeah, quite often. Stereotypes based on my educational background. It's interesting being in a creative business. Um, there's often an assumption that uh, a lawyer, and sometimes a finance person are the least creative people in the room. I've had to combat that stereotype to certain degrees throughout my career. And there have been times also, and I should mention this, in my career, it wasn't just straight line. Um, for a 5-year period, I left the law, still with the company. I was working for one of our labels, Geffen Records, and I was the general manager of Geffen Records for 5 years in a completely non-legal capacity.
Oh,
Um, so I was, I had marketing and promotion and those kind of departments reporting to me, and so it was much more of a creative job, and so that that balanced things out. And even now, as we speak, I'm the general counsel of our entire music group, but I'm also serving as the interim chairman of Def Jam Recordings, one of our labels, while I'm searching for a new president for the company.
wow. That's a lot of jobs.
Yeah, yeah, and yes. That's another podcast, Merle. It's another podcast.
Right. How to wear too many hats, or
Yeah, how to wear too many hats during
how
a
to
global
say no.
pandemic, right? I mean, like none of this it wasn't supposed to go on quite this long, but yeah, I'm stuck now.
So okay, so you talked about stereotypes and in for being a lawyer, and how that looks. What about have you dealt with, or it sounds like you've been fortunate. I've talked to other people, particularly people of color on our podcast, who've had felt like they've had to really navigate stereotypes, especially litigators in the courtroom, and what the preconceived notion is when they walk in a courtroom. It doesn't sound like you've dealt with any of that with respect to race.
Well, it's interesting. When I was a litigator, particularly when I was a prosecutor, where I was in court quite a bit, um, as a black man litigating in D.C., that was fantastic, a fantastic experience. And here's a great story. So um, I had a very high profile trial of a very high level government official, and there were 4 of us on a trial team, and we it came time to pick the jury, and we were doing jury selection, and this one no, that one no. There was one guy. He was probably you know early to mid 30s, had an athletic build. He was white, and he had gone to Duke and even gone to Duke's law school for I think 1 or 2 years. Had not completed law school, but had ultimately had dropped out. But he'd had a year or two of law school. Now the other 3 members of my trial team were all white males, and boy, they loved this guy. And something about me, I don't feel it. I don't feel it.
Right.
And they were like, no, 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 this is the guy. This is the guy. And we ultimately kept him. The trial went on for 6 weeks, almost 2 months. We submit the case to the jury. We're waiting a day, 2, 3 days goes by. Judge says there's a note from the jury. We rush to the courthouse. Jury has a note. They have a question. They have a question about jury nullification. And we're like,
What?
what? And so we kind of deal with it. And then the next day there was another note along those same lines, and the judge basically says, "You got one juror in there who's basically well, actually, what happened? We ended up having a mistrial, and then the judge told us that the one juror had brought up the concept of jury nullification. Nothing. It was nowhere in the instructions. Nowhere. It was not something that really was relevant to the case. But and it turned out to be that one guy. So since we had a mistrial, we actually retried this individual. And this time, everyone looked at me and said, "Okay, you pick the jury." and I picked the jury. They let me do it. I picked the jury, and we quickly got a conviction, and life went on. But I only say that it was kind of a little bit of a reverse stereotype in a sense. But in a jurisdiction like DC, it was wonderful to look in the box and see a lot of people that look like you and could
Right.
relate to you. As well as court personnel. Not so many, a few of the judges, but certainly, the clerks and the bailiffs and whatnot. So that was pleasant. But I have definitely encountered stereotypes throughout my career, stereotypes based on race a lot. Um, in my current position, it's not uncommon to we may be involved in a big negotiation or trying to settle litigation or something, and there's a big meeting, and I might show up with several of my lawyers, one, two, or three. I have a staff of 175 lawyers around the world, and I may show up at one of these meetings, and it's interesting to watch the dynamic in the room,
Mm-hmm.
because it's with if it's people who we've not met before, undoubtedly the dialogue will go back and forth, and I might interject something in terms of position, or we're not going to go that far, and people might look at me and then go, okay, as I was saying, and then ultimately it gets to the point, and then then they realize who's actually calling the shot, and it's fascinating to watch it. Yeah, for me, it's something that I've turned into a bit of a game, because I've learned to enjoy it, because it's the only other way to address it. Um, but yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
It's present, and in no in many corporate environments, it's very these kind of challenges exist in an entertainment company, particularly a record company. It's very interesting because you tend to have a fairly diverse workforce, because you're dealing with a fairly diverse product in the terms of
Right.
artists. So you tend to have a workforce that kind of looks and feels a lot like the roster of artists that you're working with, and so there are certain people who are really good with country music, and certain people that are really good with rock music, and certain people that might have a greater affinity or knowledge with hip hop or R&B music. Um, but when you get to the senior ranks, uh, it's not so diverse,
Got it.
and so it is interesting to, as people see someone that looks like me, that has a background like mine, and then has a position like mine. It is not lost on me the responsibility that I feel to make sure they understand exactly who I am and what I am and what I'm about and what I am not willing to accept as in terms of the realm of acceptable behavior.
And that brings me to authenticity, because I think that, or I believe that, in all these difficult situations, the people who tend to transcend them, and the people who tend to be able to, get past all these things, and enjoy the game, as you said, are generally understand who they are, and insist on being authentic. So, do you agree with that? And if you do, what makes you authentic? Either personally or professionally.
I do agree for sure, and it's something that I haven't. Well, I was going to say it's something I had to grow into. Not my authenticity. I've always been black, and I've got that. But it's the being comfortable addressing the uncomfortable situation. I'll put it that way. And that took me a little while to get to that point where I felt that I was comfortable enough to address the uncomfortable situation, which is not something I'm proud to say. And it's not that I suffered through too much, because I was someone who was raised not to suffer through things like that. But I have, it took a while for me to kind of get to the point where I was comfortable, and now I'm kind of gone even further past that, where I'm like, not only am I comfortable, I seize those moments, and make them opportunities for learning, and growth for not only the individuals who might be engaging in behavior that's their conduct that's not appropriate in one way or another, but also just the company as a whole. Um, but it is something that I think it's for when you're more junior, it's not always easy.
Right.
And I'll give you an example. I mean, I've had situations. I'll give you two. I had one where, true story, I was being offered a job. I was actually being offered the job as general manager of Geffen Records, and I was told by what was to be my boss that he started the conversation by saying, "You know something, Jeff? You know, you just happen to be black." And then I don't think I heard anything he said for the next probably 25 to 35 seconds. It just
Right.
went to it was like a Charlie Brown cartoon where he was talking. It was like, wah, 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 wah. I was just like, in my mind, I'm thinking, did this man just say, I just happen to be black? And of course, the range of emotions are running through me. Do I get up and walk out? Do I get up and slap him? Of course, we're not going to do that. But I will admit, it was in the decision tree. So
Right.
do I just sit here and listen? And there was another individual in the room at the time. And after the meeting, as I walked out, the other guy ran up to me and said, "Did you understand what he was saying?" I said, "Hell no, I didn't understand. I understood what he said, but I don't. I mean, like, I'm not. He said, "Sir, calm down, calm down, calm down." I said, "Why?" He goes, he doesn't. He's not the most articulate. What he was trying to say was not that you happen to be black, but what he was saying was he views you as a music executive who's black, not as a black music executive, meaning he viewed me as someone whose abilities were not defined by genre or necessarily, or defined, not defined is the wrong word, limited by genre or culture, but someone who could, who's an executive that is about the music business, irrespective of genre, right? Which I guess is in my feeling, I still think it's a rather offhand compliment, I guess. Um,
Yeah.
but at its best, don't get me wrong, I took the job. So and And with pride, I remember one time I went to a show for one of the bands, with a rock band playing at some club here in LA, and I went to the show, and I remember the marketing person came up to me and said, "Wow, you're here! I'm so glad you came! Wow, that's so great that you actually came." And I guess his inference was because I didn't think you would like this kind of music.
Right.
So, you deal with things like that. You make a mental note, and sometimes you keep it moving, sometimes you don't. But in that instance, I kept it moving and chalked it up to what it was. Um, Another example was, and this was when I'd been in the music business maybe 4 or 5 years, and I was negotiating a deal with another lawyer. There's another lawyer on the other end of the phone, but I was in the room with another lawyer from the company who was senior to me, but I was leading the negotiation, and we were arguing over a point. And the lawyer on the other side, who I'd met many times in person, who was an older gentleman, some would say a legend.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, he said, he was asking for a certain amount of money. I was not willing to give that, and he said, "You know what? Frankly, you're just being niggardly." Exactly. That's what I did. Right. The other guy in the room, we were on a speakerphone. He hit the mute button right away, and the guy on the other end of the phone said, "Look it up in Webster's dictionary. It means miserly or cheap." And I'm sitting there like, he did not just say this.
Oh my God.
So my colleague who was white, I appreciated that because he said, "Don't take the bait, don't take the bait, just chill for a second." And then we went off of mute and continued the negotiation and got it done. And I never forgot that as long as I lived. And
Wow.
I,
Wow.
I yeah.
You started this whole conversation like, nah, everything's cool. I'm good. I don't have issues. I haven't done, and then you go there. Thank you, Jeff Harleston.
Well, we look, we go through these things, and we're not alone. We all go through them in our own ways. What I've learned is the importance of, and where the role I'm in now is really making sure that younger people, more junior people, people coming up, know that I know that these things happen, and know that it's not okay, and that they are welcome to talk to me about it or anybody else, and that I'll be damned if they talk to me. It's going to become an issue because it should be.
That's awesome, and I'm really proud of the things that you guys are doing and what you're doing and your perspective on that. You know, what how are you encouraging your? I know you have kids. How are you encouraging them to have confidence and courage and embrace their authentic selves?
That's it, boy. We How much time do we have?
Not much.
No, it's a regular topic of conversation that my wife and I have with our kids. We have four, and they're all slightly different um, in terms of personality and approach, but generationally things are a little different. And again, it's always trying to instill in them the confidence to to take your position and stick to it. Um, the instilling a sense of duty to what I think my grandfather would have probably called the black man's burden. I call it now their duty to call it out. I mean, you can't, it's not okay. And certain behaviors are not okay, and be the one to stand up and call it out. Um, and and they're they're learning to find their their own comfort level in all of those in all those behaviors.
Well, that's diverse. I mean, having four kids and they're all different. You should be a master at managing diversity. I feel for you. So you know what what role, Jeff, do you feel that diversity, inclusion, and equity has played in how you've walked through life, both personally and professionally? And what do you feel that your role is and your obligation is with respect to diversity, inclusion, and equity?
Well, I feel very strongly about diversity. Uh, I feel even more strongly about equity and inclusion. In my life, our generation, I think diversity was helpful in terms of opening some doors that probably weren't open before. Um, but when I look at diversity, it's it's the easy job, right?
Right.
Diversity is getting a bunch of people who look different or come from different backgrounds or have differing experiences all together in the same room. Great, that's easy. That's relatively easy. I mean, we think back to our ancestors. I'm sure my parents would say, "No, it's really hard," but no, that's the easy job. The real challenge and the win is when you are able to develop inclusion and ultimately equity. And I view it really in that order. And what that means to me is that it's not that the institution, organization, whatever, is able to provide a diverse workforce, student body, class size, whatever. That's not like there's a diverse group of people who are make up or comprise that institution. It's that diversity is in the bloodstream, that those individuals are have come into that organization and are able to be accepted in the organization and to be able to help drive the organization. So what I mean by that is, for example, if you bring in a bunch of diverse people, I think I would say it's probably the mindset 35, 40 years ago was diversity, get them in, and then we'll have them assimilate to the way we are. The
Right.
organization wasn't changing. I mean, I could talk about some of those law firms I worked at. It was like, glad to have you, you know, come to the club. In fact, one of the firms even had a retreat in West Virginia, a firm that I worked at, and it was at a former like plantation. And it was like, I mean, it's crazy. But that to me is it's diversity, but that's like you want me to assimilate and become like you. I don't want to do that. The key is when you can get inclusion and then equity, and that requires the organization institution to change,
Right.
grow, to expand, so that it actually now encompasses that that complete circle of diversity rather than bringing people in and changing them. And that's when it works, because the importance of having a diverse workforce is it's better. It makes us stronger. I want different opinions. I want different points of view. I want, that's how we're gonna be better. If everybody's thinking the same thing all the time, we're all gonna be. It makes it easy, but we're all gonna do the same thing. We're not gonna innovate. We're not gonna grow. We're not gonna expand and develop and evolve into what we can actually be. The strength is when you have a diverse workforce that is that has an element of or substantial degree of inclusion, and that means the institution has actually changed by having those people there, and that's what makes it better. um, and equity is critical in the equation, because we could bring in, say we have a record label with 100 people in it, and 70 of them are are the most diverse group in terms of race, ethnicity, religion, whatever, all the boxes, right? But the top 10% are a bunch of white men. That's not equity.
Right.
That's not equity. And
Well,
and so you people talk about things like the Rooney Rule. For those who aren't familiar with the Rooney Rule, it came from the NFL, where they, interviewing for coaches by rule, they had to, in the final, two or three candidates, something like that, had to include at least one diverse candidate.
color. Right.
Um, I'm all for that in businesses like mine. For positions that are VP, senior VP, and above, absolutely, because that's the only way you'll get change. People, we all know this. People hire people like themselves. It's easier.
Yeah.
I go
Yeah.
back to that juror, right? That juror was just like the three other guys on my trial team. They could totally relate to him. They'd want to be friends with him just from interviewing him for a jury. He went to Duke. One guy even said that. I went to Carolina. He went to Duke. I'm like, what are you
Right.
talking about? Really? So people hire people like themselves. We know that. And
Right.
and and so people aren't necessarily looking for someone that's not like themselves. And when they're exposed to someone who is someone they would, I mean, how often you're in this business, but how often is someone put in front of someone, and it's a candidate that they would never on their own have thought would be appropriate, and lo and behold, after meeting them, they go, she's amazing. Where's she been? I wouldn't have thought it, but she's incredible. And that's why I think that rule is very important, because you
Right.
have to at least expand the candidate pool.
Well, and
I
let me
can
ask
go,
you
I can
this.
go on forever on this. I feel very strongly about it. I'm very outspoken about it, and it's critically important for change.
And of course, that's my business, and that's what my passion is, and that's where I spend my time professionally. But let me ask you this: as a an executive with the ability to hire outside counsel, and this is what a lot of diverse partners and partners of color talk about all the time, is that there it's hard for them to get the credit for the business. It's hard for them to to get their to get the revenue associated with having business. And a lot of people think that that's up to people like you, the GCs and the people who are hiring partners and working with these law firms. Do you feel that there's a part that you or your colleagues should play in getting that kind of equity for people of color in those positions?
Absolutely. I mean, I'll say this. It's um, I have instituted the policy, a policy to that extent, where, I mean, there's some relationships our company has had with certain firms for a really long time. And in those instances, it's actually been a little bit easier, because my conversation has been, I think you're great. You do fantastic work for us. I'm very happy with the work the firm does as a client. The only thing that bothers me is you you know I am tired of not seeing people that look different in the room.
Right.
So I'm suggesting that you find that. Now, that doesn't address the partner billing issue, because there'll be situations where partners are typically, I'm talking about, tend to be certain white men. But in other instances, I have sought out certain partners of color, um, and asked them, and actually have sought out business from them. Um, and made it, but it's certainly been made clear to all the firms we work for, that, or I'm sorry, that we work with, that that it's something that matters to me. In some respects, I think it's easier for me than if I were not a GC of color, in the
Right.
sense that, it's a very short conversation, you know, um, and I've seen the change. I really have. There's one story. I'll leave names out of it, but I was at a bar function. The Black Bar here in LA had a function. It was last year, and I was the guest of a firm, and there was a kind of a break lull in the dinner, one of these large galas, and the MC for the evening was walking around talking to people, and she went to one table and said, "What firm are you at? Are you from?" And a couple of the lawyers at the table said the name of their firm, which we do a tremendous amount of work with. But every lawyer I've ever met from that firm is white. And I'm like, what? So I get up from my chair, walk over to that table, and say, "Are you guys with firm X?" And they go, "Yeah." And I said, "Hi, I'm Jeff Harleston. I'm the general counsel of Universal. You guys do a lot of work with us. How do I not know you?" And out came the business cards, which was great. In fairness, one of them was a lateral partner who had just started a week before.
Okay.
But the good news is she was also really had a really strong reputation in practice in class actions, which guess what? We just got sued in a class action.
Okay.
And we were thinking of using her new firm. So so that night I went home, and that night or the next morning I sent an email to the partner that I deal with. And almost instantaneously, I got one back saying, "I was just about to email you. I heard you ran into, some of my partners last night at this dinner. Can we do a lunch? I want to bring everybody." And so we had a lunch, and now again, things are very positive. So it definitely, I think the GCs have a role to play, and not just the GCs of color. All general counsels have a role to play.
Right. Right. Well, Jeff, this has been wonderful. It's been enlightening, and it's been fun. And I just really want to thank you for spending the time and telling all those stories. I'm glad all the names remain nameless, but thank you for sharing with us, and I hope you enjoyed it.
I really did. Thank you, Merle, and thank you for the opportunity to share some of these stories. I think it's also very important that we all talk with one another and share with one another, and that particularly those lawyers who might be in practice environments where they're one of know that you're not you're not the experiences you're having are not singular, that they're shared by many others, and one thing that's always been helpful to me are colleague relationships, and being active in local bar associations and the like. So I encourage you all to do that.
Well, thank you so much, and thanks for being here to BS with me today, Jeff. And thanks to everyone for listening.
Hit it! That's what I'm talking about.
Wait! Okay, now, from the beginning.
We hope you enjoyed the stories shared in today's episode of BS, Beyond Stereotypes. Join us next time when another authentic personality unleashes their uniqueness on the world.